On May 24, 1941, the unthinkable happened. The largest and most powerful warship in the British Royal Navy was destroyed in just 3 minutes. A single salvo of artillery transformed the Pride of England into a hell of flames and twisted steel, taking with it 1,415 men to the bottom of the ocean. This is the story of HMS Hood, the ship that symbolized British might and became one of the greatest naval disasters in history. MS Hood was not just a ship. It was a living legend. Launched in 1918, this battle cruiser was the largest warship in the world at the time, measuring 262 meters in length. Its elegant and imposing silhouette became the symbol of the British Empire on the seas. For 2 decades, the Hood traveled the world on diplomatic missions, visiting ports on every continent. Wherever it arrived, crowds gathered to admire this giant of the seas. For the British, it represented security and naval supremacy. For its enemies, it was a daunting warning of British military power. But behind that glorious image, the Hood carried a fatal vulnerability. Its design, conceived during the First World War, prioritized speed and firepower over protection. The ship's deck had relatively thin armor, especially vulnerable to projectiles falling on a diving trajectory. Naval engineers knew this, and modernization plans were drawn up several times. However, with the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, there was neither the time nor the resources to retire the Hood for the necessary refits. The Royal Navy needed every ship available. That decision to postpone the improvements would be fatal. When the war began, the Royal Navy's primary mission was clear: to protect the Atlantic convoy routes that kept Great Britain alive. The British Isles depended entirely on supplies coming from the sea, especially from the United States and Canada. Food, weapons, fuel, everything arrived on merchant ships crossing the Atlantic in vulnerable convoys. And the greatest threat to these convoys were the powerful German warships, especially the Bismarck, the most modern and fearsome battleship ever built by the Kriegsmarine. The Bismarck was an impressive war machine. At 251 meters long and displacing over 50,000 tons when fully loaded, it incorporated the most advanced German naval technology. Its 8 enormous 380mm artillery pieces could fire 800-kilogram projectiles at a distance of over 35 kilometers. Its armor was virtually impenetrable by the standards of the time, with special steel plates up to 320 millimeters thick protecting vital areas. For the Germans, the Bismarck and its sister ship, the Prinz Eugen, represented the chance to dominate the Atlantic and cut British supply lines, potentially winning the war. In May 1941, the German High Command decided it was time to act. The operation was codenamed Rinneburg, or Exercise Rhine. The plan was simple but devastating. The Bismarck and the Prinz Eugen would break through the British naval blockade, reach the open Atlantic, and then mercilessly attack Allied merchant convoys. If successful, the operation could sink hundreds of thousands of tons of cargo ships, causing famine and crisis in England. On May 18th, the 2 German ships left the port of Gotenhafen in occupied Poland and began their deadly journey towards the North Atlantic. British intelligence was quick to detect the movement. Reconnaissance planes spotted the German ships off Norway, refueling before heading into more dangerous waters. The British Admiralty went on high alert. If the Bismarck reached the open Atlantic, it would be nearly impossible to protect the convoys. The decision was made quickly: intercept and destroy the Bismarck before it could cause havoc. For this crucial mission, the Royal Navy deployed its most famous ship, HMS Hood, accompanied by the newly commissioned battleship HMS Prince of Wales, as well as several escort destroyers. Command of the operation was given to Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland, an experienced officer who had embarked on the Hood himself. The mission was clear: find the Bismarck in the Denmark Strait, the waterway between Iceland and Greenland, and prevent its passage at all costs. Holland knew he was leading his ship into the most important battle of his career. The Hood's crew, 1,418 men, were confident. After all, they served on the most famous ship in the most powerful navy in the world. Many of them could hardly wait to finally face the enemy in battle. On the night of May 23rd, the tension aboard the Hood and the Prince of Wales was palpable. Everyone knew that contact with the enemy was imminent. The men slept fully clothed, ready to rush to their battle stations at any moment. The sea was rough and a dense fog covered the region, drastically reducing visibility. At 10 o'clock at night, the cruiser HMS Suffolk, which was patrolling the area, spotted the German ships on radar. The hunt had begun. Throughout the night, British ships tracked the signals on radar, attempting to position themselves for an attack at dawn. Admiral Holland's strategy was to rapidly approach the German ships at high speed, minimizing the time the Hood would be exposed to long-range enemy fire. He knew of the vulnerability of his ship's deck and wanted to close the distance as quickly as possible so that enemy shells would hit the thicker side armor instead of falling on the deck. It was a risky but necessary plan. At dawn on May 24, 1941, at 5:35 a.m., the lookouts on the Hood finally spotted the silhouettes of the German ships through the morning mist. The distance was approximately 25 kilometers. The cry of enemy ship in sight echoed through the Hood's communication system, and immediately the entire ship prepared for combat. The enormous main guns were turned towards the enemy. In the engine rooms, the engineers increased the engine power to maximum. At the fire control stations, the officers adjusted the complex aiming systems. In a few minutes, the Hood and the Prince of Wales were ready for battle. But there was a crucial problem at the start of the battle. Admiral Holland initially misidentified which German ship was the Bismarck. He ordered both British ships to concentrate their fire on the ship in front, believing it to be the Bismarck, when in fact it was the Prinz Eugene. This mistake would cost precious minutes before the fire was redirected to the correct target. At 5:52 a.m., the Hood opened fire. The roar of the main guns was deafening. Huge columns of water rose near the German ships as the first shells fell. The Germans responded almost immediately. Both the Bismarck and the Prinz Eugene opened fire on the British ships. On the deck of the Bismarck, Admiral Gunther Lütjens and Captain Ernst Lindemann coldly observed the unfolding battle. They had the advantage. Their ships were positioned so they could use all their main guns, while the British, approaching at an angle, could only use their forward guns. The exchange of fire intensified rapidly, with half-ton projectiles cutting through the air at supersonic speeds. The first few minutes of the battle were confused and chaotic. Projectiles rained down around the ships on both sides, creating gigantic columns of water. Then the Prinz Eugene struck the Hood, causing a large fire on the deck. Flames and smoke began to rise from the British ship, but the damage was not critical. The Hood continued advancing, closing the distance to the German ships. Admiral Holland had ordered a change of course to allow all of the Hood's guns to fire, a maneuver that momentarily exposed more of the ship to enemy fire. It was then, at 5:59 in the morning, that the unthinkable happened. 7 minutes after the start of the fighting, Bismarck fired its fifth salvo. This time, the aim was absolutely precise. One or more 380mm shells from the Bismarck pierced the lightly armored deck of the Hood and penetrated deep into the ship. What happened next was instantaneous and catastrophic. The shells exploded inside or near the Hood's ammunition magazines, where tons of gunpowder for the main guns were stored. The explosion that followed was apocalyptic. A gigantic fireball shot hundreds of meters into the air, illuminating the morning sky. The force of the explosion was so great that it literally broke the Hood in two. The stern section, with its rear guns still pointed at the enemy, separated from the rest of the ship. The bow immediately began to sink. On the Prince of Wales, sailing right behind, the crew watched in utter horror as their sister ship was destroyed. Some described seeing the Hood's propeller still spinning in the air as the stern rose vertically before sinking. From the first visual contact to the complete sinking of the Hood, less than 10 minutes passed. The most famous ship of the British Royal Navy disappeared beneath the icy waves of the North Atlantic approximately 3 minutes after the fatal explosion. Of the 1,418 souls on board, only 3 survived. 3. Lieutenant Commander William Dundas, Private Robert Tilburn, and Private Ted Briggs managed to be sucked out of the ship by the swirling water and were rescued hours later by a British destroyer, suffering from severe hypothermia and in a state of profound shock. The news of the sinking of the Hood caused devastating shock throughout Great Britain. When the Admiralty announced the loss, many simply couldn't believe it. The Hood was considered unsinkable, a symbol of British invincibility at sea. Its swift and complete destruction deeply shook national confidence at a time when Britain was already fighting Nazi Germany alone in Europe. Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister, was visibly shaken by the news. He immediately ordered all available resources to be mobilized for a single mission: to find and sink the Bismarck. Revenge for the loss of the Hood became a national obsession. The Royal Navy launched the largest naval manhunt in history up to that point. Dozens of battleships, cruisers, and destroyers converged from all directions to surround the Bismarck. Planes took off from aircraft carriers to locate and attack the German battleship. For 3 days, the Bismarck desperately tried to escape, sailing towards occupied France, where it could find protection from the Luftwaffe and repairs in safe harbors. But on May 26th, torpedo bombers managed to damage the Bismarck's rudder, leaving the large ship virtually impossible to maneuver. On May 27th, surrounded by British warships and unable to maneuver effectively, the Bismarck faced its fate. The battleships HMS King George V and HMS Rodney opened fire at close range, turning the pride of the Kriegsmarine into twisted, burning iron. After a brutal bombardment that lasted more than an hour, the Bismarck sank in the Atlantic, taking with it more than 2,000 German sailors. Revenge for the Hood was complete, but it did not bring back the 1,415 men lost on that tragic day in May. In the following decades, HMS Hood became a legend, a ghost ship that haunted the British collective memory. Its exact location remained a mystery for over 60 years. The ocean kept its secret, and the families of the lost sailors had no place to mourn their dead. Several expeditions were proposed over the years to find the wreckage, but the extreme depth of the location, over 2,800 meters, and the hostile conditions of the North Atlantic made the search extremely difficult and expensive. It wasn't until July 2001, exactly 60 years after the sinking, that an expedition led by David Mearns, a shipwreck locator, finally found the remains of the Hood. Using state-of-the-art side-scan sonar and remotely operated underwater vehicles, the team located the ship's remains scattered across the ocean floor at a depth of 2,800 meters. The images captured were impressive and moving. Large sections of the hull, cannons still mounted in their turrets, pieces of machinery, all covered by decades of marine sediment and ocean life. The discovery was met with immense reverence. For the British, the Hood was not just a sunken ship, it was a war grave containing the remains of 1,415 men. Images of the wreckage were shared with the families of the survivors and the dead, bringing a sense of closure after decades of uncertainty. Ted Briggs, one of the 3 survivors, who dedicated his life to honoring the memory of his fallen comrades, was present when the first images were revealed. He described the moment as deeply emotional, finally knowing where his friends rested. Subsequent expeditions to the site yielded more details about the state of the wreckage. The Hood is broken into several major sections, confirming the catastrophic violence of the explosion that destroyed it. The bow and stern are separated, scattered across a considerable area of the seabed. Many of the main guns are still present, silent witnesses to the firepower that once made the Hood the most feared warship in the world. Personal belongings, pieces of equipment, and ship structures have been documented, each telling a small part of the larger story. The shipwreck site has been officially designated a protected war grave. Unauthorized diving is prohibited, and any expedition to the site requires special approval from the British government. The ship's bell, one of the most symbolic items of any vessel, was recovered in a 2015 expedition after years of careful planning. The bell has been restored and is now on display at the National Museum of the Royal Navy in Portsmouth, serving as a permanent memorial to the lost crew. In a moving ceremony, the bell was consecrated in the presence of relatives of the deceased and naval dignitaries. The story of HMS Hood remains a powerful reminder of the fragility of even the most powerful symbols of military might. A ship that sailed the world's oceans as an ambassador of British power for over 2 decades was destroyed in just 3 minutes of intense combat. The tragedy raised important questions about naval design, about the risks of delaying critical modernizations for economic or strategic reasons, and about the terrible human cost of naval warfare. For the survivors and the families of the dead, the Hood was never just about military strategy or naval technology. It was about 1,418 men, each with their own stories, dreams, and families waiting at home. Many of them were young, some on their first mission at sea. They served with pride on the Navy's most famous ship, never imagining that their first battle would also be their last. Letters written by sailors from the Hood days before the battle, discovered decades later in personal archives, reveal ordinary men facing the extraordinary tension of war with courage and even humor. Ted Briggs, who survived the sinking at the age of 18, dedicated the rest of his long life to ensuring that the Hood and its crew were never forgotten. He wrote a book about his experience, gave countless lectures and interviews, and worked tirelessly with veterans associations and historians. Until his death in 2008, at the age of 85, he was a respected and beloved figure. The last living link to that terrible day in May 1941. His dedication ensured that future generations would continue to know and honor the story of the Hood. The Battle of the Denmark Strait, which lasted only a few minutes but changed the course of naval warfare in the Atlantic, is still studied today in naval academies around the world. It demonstrates how even the most carefully planned strategies can be undone by a single successful blow, how luck and misfortune play crucial roles in combat, and how technology alone does not guarantee victory. The Hood had firepower comparable to the Bismarck, but its inadequate protection in critical areas became its death sentence. Today, MS Hood rests at the bottom of the North Atlantic, a submerged monument to the courage and sacrifice of its crew. The icy waters preserve not only the steel wreckage of a legendary ship, but also the memory of 1,415 lives cut short on that May morning. Every year, on the anniversary of the sinking, remembrance ceremonies are held in England and elsewhere, honoring those who went to sea on the Hood and never returned. The ship's bell, now ashore, tolls in their memory, a solemn sound that echoes through the decades, ensuring they are never forgotten. The loss of the Hood had ramifications that extended far beyond that tragic day in the Denmark Strait. The sinking forced the Royal Navy to completely reassess its naval tactics and priorities. The vulnerability of battle cruisers, ships designed to combine high speed with great firepower but with sacrificed protection, became painfully evident. After the loss of the Hood, the few remaining battle cruisers in the British fleet were used with much more caution, kept away from direct confrontations with modern battleships whenever possible. The official investigation into the sinking of the Hood began immediately after the end of the war. Commissions were established to examine exactly what had gone wrong. The 3 survivors were extensively interviewed about everything they saw and experienced in the FAS. Ship's final moments. Experts in ballistics and naval design analyzed every aspect of the battle. The most likely conclusion was that a German shell had penetrated through the Hood's relatively thin deck and detonated in or near the ammunition magazines of the aft main guns, causing a massive secondary explosion that literally shattered the ship. But exact details remain the subject of debate for decades. Some alternative theories suggested that the initial explosion on deck caused by the first hit from the Prinz Eugene could have weakened critical structures, making the ship more vulnerable. Others argued that defects in ammunition storage or safety procedures may have contributed to the catastrophe. What was indisputable was that the decision to postpone the Hood's modernization, particularly the reinforcement of its deck armor, had been fatal. Had the planned reforms been carried out, the ship might have survived the same attack. For the families of the lost sailors, the decades following the sinking were marked by grief and a lack of closure. Unlike soldiers killed on land, whose bodies were often recovered and buried, the sailors of the Hood simply vanished into the depths of the ocean. There were no graves to visit, no physical place where they could mourn. Many widows and mothers never fully accepted the loss, keeping photos and letters for decades, unable to move on. The absence of a known location where the ship rested made the loss even harder to process. The search for the Hood's wreckage became almost an obsession for some. David Mearns, the maritime explorer who finally located the ship in 2001, had become fascinated by the story as a child. He read everything he could find about the Hood and the Battle of the Denmark Strait. When he became an expert in locating shipwrecks, finding the Hood became a personal mission. He understood that this wasn't just about finding a historic ship, but about bringing peace to the families who had lost loved ones 60 years earlier. The 2001 expedition was meticulously planned. Mearns and his team spent months studying historical records, battle reports, ocean currents, and all available data to determine the most likely search area. The search zone still covered hundreds of square kilometers of ocean floor. They used the research vessel Northern Horizon, equipped with the most advanced side-scan sonar available at the time. Day after day, the ship traversed methodical search patterns, mapping the seabed meter by meter. On July 20, 2001, sonar detected something. A large anomaly on the seabed, with features matching the wreckage of a large ship. The excitement on board was palpable, but the crew maintained professional caution. They sent a remotely operated vehicle equipped with cameras to investigate. As the RAV descended through nearly 3 kilometers of dark water, the tension was unbearable. Then, emerging from the darkness on the video screens, the first images appeared, massive steel hull plates, clearly from a large warship, covered in marine life but still recognizable. As the RAV explored, more details emerged. A gun turret, with its enormous artillery tubes still pointing outwards. Sections of the superstructure, collapsed but identifiable. And then, the definitive moment. Identification numbers engraved on a piece of equipment, confirming beyond a shadow of a doubt that these were the wreckage of HMS Hood. The crew aboard the Northern Horizon erupted in applause, but it was a silent, respectful celebration. Everyone understood the solemnity of the moment. They had not only found a lost ship, they had found the final resting place of 1,415 men. The images captured by the ROV revealed the violent state in which the Hood was left. The ship was broken into 3 main sections, scattered across a wide area of the ocean floor. The bow section lay on its side, with large holes torn into the hull. The midsection, where the catastrophic explosion had occurred, was almost unrecognizable, twisted and fragmented by the violence of the detonation. The stern was relatively more intact, its rear guns still in their turrets, a silent testament to the power it once represented. The public announcement of the discovery was carefully orchestrated. The Royal Navy was informed first, followed by the families of the survivors and descendants of the crew. A press conference was held where the first images were revealed to the public. The impact was immense. Newspapers in the United Kingdom put the story on their front pages. Television programs dedicated specials to the discovery. For a nation that had grown up with the legend of the Hood, finally seeing where and how the ship lay was deeply moving. Ted Briggs, then 78 years old and the last living survivor of the tragedy, was invited to see the footage firsthand. He had waited 60 years for that moment. When he first saw the footage of the wreckage, tears streamed down his face. In later interviews, he described mixed feelings of sadness at the visual confirmation of the destruction, but also of relief at finally knowing where his 1,415 companions rested. He had carried the memory of that day for 6 decades, and now there was closure that had previously seemed impossible. The discovery also brought new information about the Hood's final moments. Analysis of the wreckage confirmed that the explosion had indeed occurred in the ammunition magazine area, validating the prevailing theory about the cause of the sinking. The violence of the explosion was evident in the state of the wreckage. Experts calculated that the force of the detonation would have been equivalent to hundreds of tons of explosives detonating simultaneously, explaining why the ship was literally split in two and sank so quickly. Subsequent expeditions to the wreckage yielded further discoveries. In 2012, another expedition led by Marines returned to the site with even more advanced equipment. They captured high-resolution images and detailed three-dimensional mappings of the wreckage. These new images revealed extraordinary details. Personal belongings of the sailors were identified: kitchen plates, tools, pieces of uniforms. Each item was a poignant reminder of the lives lived aboard that ship, lives cut short so suddenly. The 2015 mission had a specific objective: to recover the ship's bell. A warship's bell is its most sacred symbol, traditionally used in remembrance ceremonies. For the Royal Navy and the families of the Hood's crew, recovering the bell would create a tangible memorial, a focal point to honor the dead. The operation was incredibly complex. The extreme depth meant that human divers could not reach the wreckage. Everything had to be done using remotely operated underwater vehicles. The bell was located among the wreckage of the superstructure. It was partially buried in sediment and covered by marine organisms that had made it their home for over 70 years. The ROV team worked meticulously, carefully cleaning around the bell and preparing it for lifting. Every movement had to be precise. One mistake could damage the bell or lose it in the depths forever. Finally, after hours of delicate work, the bell was secured to cables and slowly hoisted through nearly 3 kilometers of water to the surface. When the bell emerged from the ocean for the first time in 74 years, it was a moment of profound emotion for everyone aboard the research vessel. The bell, covered in marine incrustation but structurally intact, was carefully placed on deck. The crew stood in respectful silence, aware of the significance of what they had recovered. That bell had called the sailors of the Hood to their posts for over 2 decades. It had rung in ports around the world, and now it would be a permanent memorial to those who died when the ship sank. The bell was taken back to England and underwent a lengthy conservation process. Experts worked meticulously to remove marine incrustations while preserving the original bronze. When the work was completed, the bell shone again. The original inscriptions clearly legible: HMS Hood 1918. On May 24, 2016, exactly 75 years after the sinking, the bell was officially dedicated in a ceremony at the National Museum of the Royal Navy in Portsmouth. The bell dedication ceremony was a deeply emotional occasion. Hundreds attended, including descendants of the Hood's crew, Royal Navy officers, government dignitaries, and naval veterans. The bell was installed in a specially designed display, surrounded by panels bearing the names of each of the 1,415 men who died with the ship. During the ceremony, the bell was rung once for each man lost. The sound echoed through the museum, a solemn tribute that took hours to complete. For many families, the dedication of the bell provided the closure they had sought for 3 generations. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren of men who died at the Hood could finally have a place to honor their ancestors. Many brought old photos, letters, medals. Stories were shared of men who had been just names on casualty lists, but who now came alive through their families' memories. One man brought his grandfather's pocket watch, stopped forever at the moment of the sinking. A woman shared love letters her grandfather had sent to her grandmother, the last one dated just days before the fatal battle. The story of the Hood also inspired a broader reassessment of how lost warships are treated. The concept of sunken war graves gained greater legal recognition and international protection. The Hood's location is not unique. There are hundreds of sunken warships around the world, each containing the remains of sailors who died in service. The respect shown to the Hood's wreckage set important precedents. Unauthorized dives are prohibited, commercial salvage is illegal, and any scientific expedition requires rigorous approval and must be conducted with the utmost respect. The technology used to find and document the Hood also significantly advanced the field of maritime archaeology. Side-scan sonar techniques, remotely operated vehicles, 3-dimensional mapping methods all were refined and improved through work on the wrecks. These technological advancements subsequently enabled the discovery and documentation of many other historically significant shipwrecks, contributing to our understanding of naval and maritime history. From an educational standpoint, the story of the Hood has become a valuable tool for teaching about World War II, naval technology, and the human realities of war. The Royal Navy Museum has developed extensive exhibits on the ship, including detailed models, recovered artifacts, and personal narratives from sailors. British schools have incorporated the story into their history curricula. Documentaries have been produced, books written, and educational resources created. The story resonates because it combines elements of technology, strategy, tragedy, and human heroism. The contrast between the Hood and the Bismarck has also become a fascinating study in parallel destinies. Both ships were prides of their respective navies. Both were built to represent national power. Both had relatively brief operational careers before meeting violent ends. The Bismarck survived the Hood by only 3 days before being hunted down and destroyed by the Royal Navy in one of the largest naval operations of the war. The Bismarck's wreckage was also found in 1989 and is also protected as a war grave. The stories of the two ships are eternally intertwined, reminders of the futility and human cost of conflict. For naval historians, the Battle of the Denmark Strait remains one of the most studied moments in naval warfare. Every decision made by both sides has been exhaustively analyzed. Why did Admiral Holland choose to approach at the angle he did? Could the Hood have survived if it had maneuvered differently? Did the initial misidentification of the target make a difference in the outcome? These questions are debated in academic seminars and naval enthusiast forums. The consensus is generally that the Hood was at a fundamental disadvantage due to its inadequate protection, but that elements of bad luck also played a crucial role. Luck, or the lack thereof, was indeed a significant factor. The probability of a single projectile penetrating exactly the right spot, at the right angle, to cause a catastrophic explosion in the ammunition depots was statistically small. Thousands of projectiles had been fired in naval battles without causing such results. The Hood had served for 23 years, participated in countless operations, and survived the First World War. That it would be destroyed in its first significant battle of the Second World War by such a devastatingly precise hit seemed almost cruel in its randomness. The 3 survivors carried the weight of this randomness for the rest of their lives. Why did they survive when 1,415 others died? It was a question without a satisfactory answer. Ted Briggs was at his station in the fire control center on the bridge when the explosion occurred. He was thrown overboard by the force of the detonation and managed to swim free from the sinking ship. Lieutenant Commander Dundas was in a similar position. Bob Tilburn was further back on the ship. All three were on deck or near openings when the ship sank, allowing them to escape the downward suction. The speed at which the Hood sank meant that the vast majority of the crew had no chance of escape. The ship disappeared beneath the waves in approximately 3 minutes. Men in the engine rooms, ammunition holds, and interior spaces of the ship were trapped as the Hood plunged to the bottom. Even those on deck had only seconds to react. The frigid waters of the North Atlantic, just a few degrees above freezing, meant that even those who managed to reach the water would have only minutes before hypothermia killed them. The Prince of Wales and the escorting destroyers were still under attack from the Bismarck and the Prinz Eugene and could not immediately engage in rescue operations. When the Prince of Wales was finally able to send a destroyer to search for survivors, more than 2 hours had passed since the sinking. The waters were covered in fuel oil and floating debris, but there were very few men alive in the water. The 3 survivors were pulled aboard the destroyer HMS Electra, suffering from severe hypothermia, shock, and minor injuries. They were the only ones found alive. Further searches revealed no more survivors. The sea had claimed all the others. Ted Briggs' experience became particularly well documented because he lived until 2008 and spoke extensively about the sinking throughout his life. He described the explosion as a blinding flash of light followed by a wave of intense heat. He was thrown into the air and fell into the icy water. When he emerged to the surface, he saw the stern of the Hood vertically in the air, the propellers still spinning before sliding down and disappearing. He swam through thick fuel oil, struggling to breathe until he was rescued. For weeks afterward, he suffered recurring nightmares about the sinking. Briggs was never able to return to sea on active duty after the trauma of the sinking. He was assigned to shore duties for the remainder of the war. After the war, he struggled to adjust to civilian life. Like many veterans, he found it difficult to talk about his experiences, even with close family. It was only decades later, when war memories began to be more actively preserved, that he began to share his story publicly. He became a sought-after speaker, visiting schools, museums, and veterans events, ensuring that the Hood story was told to future generations. The legacy of HMS Hood extends beyond naval or military history. The ship has become a cultural symbol, appearing in countless books, films, documentaries, and even video games about World War II. The iconic image of its elegant silhouette is instantly recognizable to naval enthusiasts. Scale models of the Hood are among the most popular for model builders. Historical societies dedicated to preserving its memory have been established. Public interest in the ship remains high even 80 years after its sinking. Part of this enduring interest stems from the dramatic nature of its loss. There is something profoundly tragic about such a powerful symbol being destroyed so quickly and completely. The speed of the sinking, the near total loss of life, the psychological impact on British morale all contribute to a narrative that resonates emotionally. The subsequent revenge against the Bismarck adds an epic dimension to the story. And the decades-long search for the wreckage, finally successful, provides a sense of resolution and fitting memorialization. For the modern Royal Navy, the Hood serves as a constant reminder of both the glories and the dangers of naval life. Cadets at the Naval Academy Dartmouth study the Battle of the Denmark Strait as part of their training. Lessons on naval design, tactics, and the risks of delaying necessary maintenance are all derived from the Hood experience. The ship's bell, on permanent display, is a place of pilgrimage for sailors currently serving, a physical link to a previous generation of sailors who made the ultimate sacrifice.